Mormon Stories is a production of the Open Stories Foundation and relies solely upon the support of people like you, its listeners. To help keep the podcast alive or to become a member of the community, please become a monthly subscriber by visiting mormonstories.org and clicking on the donate button on the right side of the page under support. All contributions to Mormon Stories are completely tax deductible and go towards producing the podcast and building communities and programs of support for Mormons like you. Thanks for your support.
Kindly light amid the encircling gloom. Lead thou me on. The night is dark and I am far from home.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It is November 17th, 2015. It is 8:47 a.m. Mountain Time. And I'm very excited to have today's guest with us. So our guest for today is Laura. Laura, tell us how to pronounce your full name.
Laura Andreasen.
Laura Andreasen, okay. And I guess, the way we're billing this and what's sort of worth mentioning right at the top of the podcast is that Laura is the granddaughter of M. Russell Ballard, who is one of the senior apostles for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And the way this interview came about is pretty straightforward. I was going through my messages on Facebook, and Laura had reached out to me and expressed, just sort of said she had an interesting story and expressed an interest possibly in talking about it. And so that's really as complex or as simple as this podcast is, or at least how it came about. So Laura, we're gonna sort of do a deep dive today, but welcome to Mormon Stories podcast, I should say.
All right, thank you.
And normally we just dive right into your story, but I think it's important to begin with sort of intention here. So why don't we begin by just you telling us why, you were interested in doing this interview?
Well, first of all, I kind of feel like I need to add a little disclaimer to say that I really hope that this interview doesn't disappoint people. I hope that I'm, true to myself, but I'm always concerned that maybe some people wish I was more anti and some people wished I was more straight line. But I kind of just want to explain my story. Maybe, unfortunately, sometimes I'm still a bit of a church apologist, especially for my grandpa, because he is my grandpa. But I feel like I do have some things that might be valuable for other people. Maybe not, we'll see. But I hope so.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we both agreed beforehand the purpose of this interview is not to criticize the church. It's not to criticize your grandpa. It's not to, take advantage of you and your situation with your family. It's simply just to understand your story and to get your perspective on what you've experienced in the church, and to keep things very constructive. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, that's great. And I'm not shy. You can go ahead and ask me things that might make me a little uncomfortable. I'm used to that. So ask away.
Okay. And I think it's probably worth mentioning up top that why don't you tell us your relationship to the church as of now?
Okay. Well, right now I have sent in a resignation email. So I'm wondering if maybe that's sort of a pansy way to do it. But it was easy and it was something that I wanted to get out there before I kind of was maybe talked into not doing it. So it's on the fence. I am pretty sure that my ecclesiastical leaders will fight me on it. So I'm going to have to decide for sure that is what I want to do. And I'm pretty dead set on it right now. But that's where we are.
So you've resigned your membership, but it hasn't been confirmed.
That's right.
Okay. All right. Okay. So and we're going to get into why you made that decision later. But let's just go ahead and dive in if that's okay.
Yep.
So, we've already talked about this, but I have no intention of being exploitative. You came to me. I made sure that you felt comfortable and safe to give this interview before talking to you. And as we agreed to before, any question that I ask, I've gathered a lot of questions from listeners. I want to make sure you feel comfortable just saying, I'd rather not talk about that, or I don't know. There's no pressure here. We just want to hear your story and whatever you're comfortable sharing with us. And I just want to make sure that's kind of understood as the ground rules. Does that sound all right?
That's all right. You are in the free and clear. I am not doing this under duress.
Okay. All right. So one of the things that I know about Elder Ballard, and I can't say I know a ton about him, is how much he references the fact that he's a direct descendant of Hyrum Smith. So talk a bit about how your family's direct relationship with the Smith family, the blood relationship with the Smith family and with Joseph Smith. Talk about how your family talks about that history, that heritage.
Well, it is so entwined in everything that we do. My son, his name is Hyrum, actually, and I've always looked up to Hyrum Smith and the example that he had of being like this person with great integrity. I think the scripture said that his integrity was above those of the angels, and I've always thought, boy, I'd love to be more like Hyrum Smith. And we're constantly told about our ancestors. We've got apostles and prophets in the lineage through my Ballard side. And there are a lot of comparisons there. And we are compared to them, maybe not outright, but I feel we're compared to them all the time. And we have to kind of look at ourselves and say, okay, how am I doing in relation to my ancestors who were so faithful?
So you feel compared to the Prophet Joseph or Hyrum or the pioneers? That's sort
Sure.
of a pressure that you guys kind of live with?
I think so. I don't think anybody does it on purpose, but it's there.
Yeah. I imagine the martyrdom of Joseph and Hyrum looms large in your family's lore. Are there ways that story is told or talked about that really leaves an imprint on you and your aunts and uncles and siblings?
Well, I remember I've been on a lot of church history tours, and I am no church scholar by any means. But we went with my grandfather to go visit many of the church sites, and I remember we went to Carthage, and I've been there a few times, but I remember seeing the blood of Hyrum Smith on the ground, and that just striking me as, that's my blood. His blood is my blood, and I felt a lot of sympathy for Hyrum and Joseph, and it's very difficult to hear things said about Joseph Smith, people calling him an old pervert, a molester. That's difficult, and I'm not saying if they're right or wrong. I'm not sure I can do that, but I know that it's hard knowing that is my bloodline. Those people are my people, and so it hurts to hear that. I don't blame people for feeling that way, but it's hard.
Yeah, that would be hard. So tell us. I'm trying to think back to what I know about your dad's ancestry. Does he come through a Melvin Ballard? Is that right? I'm trying to think about who his dad or grandfather would have been.
Yes, his father actually wasn't active for many, many years. His grandfather was Melvin J Ballard, who was an apostle as well.
Okay.
So his grandfather was an apostle.
And did you ever know? You probably never knew Melvin J Ballard.
No, I didn't know my great grandfather either.
Okay. Do you have a sense for when Melvin Ballard would have been an apostle? Like kind of what decades I'm just trying to think. I don't even know.
Melvin J?
Yeah.
So I am not 100% sure, but I would guess maybe in the 40s. See, it is terrible. I should know more about my family history, but I feel like there's just so much of it that I get lazy and I'm like, oh, I don't even, well,
Oh,
whatever.
sure.
It's it is what it is, and so people are always a little embarrassed. You don't know your family history? No, not really.
No, it's
But
all right. No, it's totally okay. I'm the same way. Like, it looks like he was ordained an apostle in 1919. Melvin J Ballard was, and he set up, opened a missionary work in South America, in Argentina. Looks like he served in the Quorum of the 12 until he died of leukemia, and he died in 39.
okay.
So he would have been an apostle during the time B.H. Roberts was, trying to talk to the apostles, I think, about his discoveries with the Book of Mormon. Anyway, okay, so your grandfather's grandfather was an apostle,
Right.
but then you're saying that Elder Ballard's father was inactive from the church?
Yes, I know he was inactive for years, and I am not privy to much of that information. Unfortunately, in our family, we kind of sweep things under the rug, and so a lot of things that may be interesting we don't talk about. But I do know that he was inactive. He and his wife, my grandpa's mother, were inactive for years and years.
And it's just you've never tried to ask, and it's never come up. It's
I have asked. I've asked my parents before, but they ignored me and just, or brushed it off. I can't remember their exact wording, but I guess it's something they don't like to focus on. So,
yeah. Okay, well, that's interesting. And so, do you have a sense for what brought your grandfather, Elder Ballard, back into church activity when he was raised by parents that weren't active? Do you know?
unfortunately, I do not know. I think they were probably active as he was growing up. And so he may have already had his testimony in place by the time they went inactive. That's my best guess.
Okay, yeah. Okay. And so tell us what you know about your grandpa, just kind of the high level points about his upbringing. Um,
Uh,
was he, do you know? I mean, what do you know? Was he raised in Utah?
he was. He was born and raised in Utah,
What part of Utah?
Salt Lake.
Okay.
And, I know that he had a few different jobs. He went to the University of Utah where he met my grandmother and they got married. A lot of his childhood stories he's written about in some of his books, but he doesn't really tell a lot of them. He's not your average grandfather that sits down and tells you the stories about his childhood, which is kind of unfortunate. But I've always said, well, he's really busy, so he might not have enough time to sit down and talk to us about that.
And that was definitely, one of the questions that people asked is just sort of, to what extent can apostles even have enough time to be a grandpa? But before we just dive into that, so he went to the U, he married your grandmother. One of the things that people like to say most about him is that he was a car salesman. Do you know anything about his career prior to becoming an apostle?
Yeah, he was a car salesman for years and years and years, and he worked with Nate Wade as one of his really good friends to this day. And that is what he is known as. If you were to take those, I remember in seminary, those little quizzes, what did this apostle do? And I remember always being like, oh, Grandpa was a car salesman, like amongst these other men who are like heart surgeons, and they were in the Supreme,
Utah Supreme Court,
Yeah,
Elder Oaks,
so
and went to Harvard Law School or business school or whatever.
that's right. And so
Yeah.
I'm like, and then he's a car salesman. All right.
So how did you feel about that, and how does your family talk about that? Is there anything they would say that all professions are honorable? I'm just trying to imagine
Oh,
the
probably. I don't know. I don't think they talk about it because maybe they don't feel like it's something to brag about, but I don't see it as anything wrong with it at all. I think it's great. I think there should be more people in the church with leadership with different jobs. So I don't see anything wrong with it, but we haven't really discussed it all that often.
Yeah, yeah. So I can just imagine him being, was he just like a superstar car salesman in Salt Lake City at a major dealership? What was his dealership? Do you know? Like what it was named?
Um, I imagine he did all right. I think he did well enough. He did a lot of investing as well. And so think that's how he earned probably more of his money than car salesman. But I know that he did well.
Okay. Do you know the name of his dealership or where it was located or what type of cars he sold? I'm just curious.
I don't. I
Okay,
don't.
that's
All I
fine.
know
That's fine.
is the story that he likes to tell about the Edsel and what a big failure it was. That's really, I know as much as you guys know when it comes to his life as a car salesman,
No,
unfortunately.
that's fine. That's fine. Okay, so how many children did he have?
He has 7 children and a ridiculous amount of grandchildren. I don't even know how many cousins I have. I haven't stopped to count them all, but there are many.
Okay. And so you come from which of his children?
I come from his second daughter, third child, Malia.
Okay, so there are two older brothers before Malia.
There's an older brother and an older daughter.
Okay, okay, okay.
Second daughter.
Okay, second daughter, sorry. Okay, so your mom's Malia. And so what do you know about her childhood and history growing up as the daughter of M. Russell Ballard?
I will say that I've asked many times. My grandmother is a saint. She is just a wonderful, wonderful woman. And sometimes I joke that you'd have to be to put up with my grandpa, which is totally rude, but
And what's her
uh,
name? What's her name?
Barbara,
Barbara Ballard.
yes.
Okay, keep going. Okay, so
And but I will say that my grandpa, from what I heard, was a wonderful father. When they would crash a car or do something they weren't supposed to do, he was very forgiving. He wasn't your strict, yell at you type of dad. Um, and I think his children all love him and are extremely loyal to him. And I think his grandchildren are as well.
okay. So you feel like from everything you've heard, both Elder Ballard and your grandmother were loving, devoted grandparents that engendered loyal children and grandchildren.
Absolutely.
Okay, so tell us about your mom and like what you know about her growing up and school and things like that.
My mom has always been very much a peacemaker, and she's pretty even keeled. She doesn't get emotional about things, and which is complete opposite of me. I get very emotional, and so it's actually really rough being a child of two somewhat unemotional people. But yeah, she's got a very even temper. She's just very kind to people. Um, she's smart. She's an English teacher at a high school in Utah right now.
So
And
she grew up in Salt Lake City.
yes, both of my parents grew up in Salt Lake City.
Okay, and did they go to the U of U also?
Yes, they both went to the University of Utah.
Okay, so you got a strong Ute tradition in your family.
Yeah, but so many of them went traitor and started rooting for BYU. I
What?
mean, I know. I'm the only U of U hardy person left. Everybody sort of, even though they went to the University of Utah, sort of turned traitor on me, but that's all right. To each his
Okay.
own.
What high school did your mom go to? Do you remember?
She went to East, I
East.
believe.
Okay. And um, any just like her hobbies growing up, or what she was interested in, or any idea?
Yeah, I believe she was in pep club or something like that, as well as she's a big reader. Um, I don't think that she did sports or anything like that, but I
Okay.
think she had plenty of friends and had a pretty good upbringing.
Okay. So tell us a bit about your dad.
He was born and raised in Salt Lake. came from a strong LDS background. I believe parents, grandparents were LDS. His parents were a lot more strict than my mother's parents, and so I've got a nice mix there of extremely strict parenting versus, a little bit less strict. But yeah, he went to Olympus High School, I believe, and served a mission in Spain, then returned, met my mom, and that's that.
Any stories about what it was like for him to be dating the daughter of an apostle? Would Elder Ballard have been an apostle when your parents married, or?
I believe he was a general authority, but not in the quorum of the 12. But I could be wrong.
Yeah.
I am not 100% certain. I know he was a general authority before I was born, and then he became a member of the quorum of the 12, like about a year after I was born.
And what year was that?
I was born in 1983.
Okay, so around 84 he became an apostle.
I believe so.
Okay. So it sounds like he and your mom, Elder Ballard, and your grandmother, tell me her name one more time.
Barbara.
So Elder Ballard and Barbara would have been just loving in-laws to your father, it sounds like, because they weren't super strict.
I think so. I think it was hard for my dad, though, because just the way my grandpa is, I feel like he can be a little intimidating. So I think it was hard for my dad. I think it still kind of is hard for my dad.
Okay. So even though he's loving, just probably his office alone can make that be really intimidating.
Right. I mean, I'm intimidated occasionally. Not as often as I used to be, but I still get intimidated by the calling that he holds.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about your parents. So they both went to the U, is that right?
Yes.
And they got married, I'm guessing in the late 70s, early 80s.
Yes.
And then tell us a bit about kind of your family's life when you were young. Okay.
So my older brother, he was born in Utah, Salt Lake City, I believe. And then my family moved. My parents moved to Boston. My dad went to get an MBA at Harvard, and that's where I was born. So, hooray!
So you were born in Cambridge?
I was born at Brigham and Women's Hospital.
Probably in Boston.
Yeah, in Boston. And so life was made complete for them, but they still had decided they would have more children. So when he graduated from Harvard, he got many different jobs, and we moved around the country, and additional siblings were born. There's 6 kids in my family. And so we kind of grew up all over the place.
And you're number what of 6?
I am number 2.
Number 2 of 6. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you kind of grew up all around. How did the church interplay with your family kind of growing up, in terms of like doing all the normal things and what did the church mean to you and your family, and how did that manifest itself growing up?
I think people who are born and raised in the church find it difficult to sort of untangle their relationship with the church, and that's how I feel. I don't really know who I would have been without the church. I sometimes get a little frustrated because I would have liked to know who I would have been as a child without the church. But it played into everything. It played into what kind of friends we made. It played into what we did or did not do on Sundays, how we spoke, what we watched. It was difficult, and it's a hard thing to say because I know a lot of people would disagree with me, but if I could, I would have gone back and not been raised in the church. And I know that's a hard thing to hear for some people, but that's how I feel.
What made it so hard?
Just, the church is supposed to make us all feel wonderful, right? We know who our parents are in heaven. We're children of God. But that puts so much pressure on children. And I have always been a sort of sensitive kid, but also a bit of a goofball. And so I tried to be who I was supposed to be in the church, and I lost a lot of my authentic self somewhere in there. And it was hard trying to learn how to get that back.
What were are you comfortable talking about some of the main struggles you had as a kid, not feeling worthy or struggling to fit in? In what types of areas was that most difficult for you?
Well, I was never really living anywhere with a lot of LDS people. I know in the majority of my growing up years, I lived in a small town in Iowa, and I was the only member of the church in my school, either me and my brother or just myself. And that was rough. I had to try to figure out who I was, and I have always been more of a liberal sort of person than a conservative type of person. And so that was difficult, but also just life experiences that I've had to sort of try to separate the church from what happened. And that's really, really difficult, I think, for anybody who is born and raised in the church.
When you say liberal, in what types of ways? And you don't have to give uncomfortable specifics, but just so we understand, are you talking about the music you listen to, or the things you like to do, or just your personality? Like, what do you mean?
Well, I guess it's kind of funny that we call it liberal, when to me, being a liberal means somebody who just loves all different types of people and is not very judgmental. And to me, that's what being a liberal meant. It meant that I was okay with people if they were gay. I was okay with people if they wore certain clothing or looked a certain way. I was fine with that. But I know that my parents were not as okay with it, and the church definitely wasn't as okay with it.
So are you kind of saying that you would make friends maybe in middle school or high school, and some of these friends wouldn't maybe meet all the LDS standards, and that made maybe your parents uncomfortable?
I'm sure. I mean, I was not popular ever. And so I kind of made friends with the people who needed a friend versus with, the popular groups. I was just friends with whoever needed a friend because I needed a friend. So I wasn't really able to be picky and choosy, not that I would have necessarily, but and so a lot of those friends were outcasts, if you will, and not maybe the kind of kids my parents would have preferred me to be friends with.
And so that made you feel pressure or stress or sadness growing up?
Yes, I felt that way. I felt like an outcast. I just never knew how to say it.
In Mormonism, you're saying?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, I was wearing pants to church before it was a thing to wear pants to church. Of course, mind you, I wore pants underneath my long skirt because there was only so far I could get away with that in my family. But I always just felt a little bit off.
Was that to be rebellious? Was that just because it was just your style choice? Was it because you had feminist sensibilities? Like, what do you attribute your differentness to?
I may have had feminist sensibilities. I did always struggle with, why didn't women have the priesthood? And what's all this nonsense about polygamy? I did struggle with that. And I think it was me trying to find my voice in my own silly way. But I was labeled as rebellious, and I was labeled as somebody with an attitude problem. And that was hard for me because I didn't think that was a fair label to be put upon me.
This was in high school?
High school, middle school, yes.
Okay. So in a family where sort of reputation and honor and church heritage is so important, that must have been really difficult to feel labeled as a rebel.
It was, because it was just who I am, and I thought it's not fair to label somebody a rebel just because they're trying to be their own authentic self, although I was not nearly as articulate about it. But we were always told, people are watching you. I mean, that sounds so creepy, but people would say, people are watching you to see how you behave. My dad was the stake president, and the first thing he ever said when he was called was, people will be watching your behavior. And that was difficult for me, and I may have kicked against the pricks a little bit, if you will, because I was basically screaming, don't watch me, don't look at me as an example. I don't know what I'm doing. If you want an example, go find one of the many other young women who are much better in the church than I am.
Well, how old were you when your dad was made a stake president?
Oh, this is my guess, but probably around 12 or 13, maybe
Okay.
younger.
Okay, so that would have been sort of your whole. Was he a stake president for 10 years or
I believe it was about 7 years.
okay.
We moved to Utah when I was 16, so he was a stake president in the Midwest.
Well, is there any way for you to know whether his father-in-law would have had anything to do with him becoming a stake president? Like, to what extent callings like that are influenced by relationships?
I have wondered that, and I have always sort of kicked myself for wondering that, because I don't think you're really supposed to be wondering these things. You're supposed to just believe that everything is inspired. But I've wondered, when I got called on a mission, I wondered how much of that is my grandpa and how much of that is really and truly inspired. Now I don't see it as a bad thing to wonder. And, perhaps there is no way for us little people to ever know that, but I'm guessing it plays a part.
Yeah. So talk a bit about what your memories are of Elder Ballard and your grandma Barbara growing up. One extreme would be you never saw them because he was always gone. Another would be you see him just very rarely, but occasionally. All the way to they were very involved and devoted and loving, all omnipresent grandparents. What was it like for you, and what are some of your memories?
I think they were as involved as they could possibly be. I mean, he is a very busy person. He travels the world doing church business, and also the fact that we didn't live in Utah, where the majority of my extended family lives, made it more difficult maybe for them to be involved. But I feel like I had a really good relationship with him. Whenever I was struggling with something, I wanted to talk to my grandpa, and he was, for whatever reason, always the first person that I wanted to talk to about issues that I had. Not always sure that was the best person for me to talk to about certain issues, but I really honored his calling as an apostle, and perhaps maybe thought his advice would be better. I don't really know the reasons why, but he was a good grandfather. He always made time for his family. And I will say that about him. He always made time for family. And my grandma, there's just nothing bad I can say about her, ever. She's an angel.
Mm. That's great. And so do you remember times reaching out to him with problems and having him help you?
So I've had good experiences reaching out to him, and I've had a couple of really bad experiences reaching out to him. Yes, so I was expelled from 2 high schools, and after I was expelled from the first one, I called him and just wanted him to tell me that everything was going to be okay. And he did tell me that, and weirdly enough, our family ended up moving to Utah not long after. So I always kind of wondered, if he had pulled some strings to get my family to move to Utah to be closer to the good ship Zion or whatever.
What took your family to Utah? Was it a job or?
Yes, my dad actually did get a job. And I hate to say this because my dad is a very smart person and he can get any type of job, but he ended up working for the church in the missionary department, and he loved it. That was probably his favorite job he's had.
Okay, so he had an MBA from Harvard.
Mm-hmm.
What was his profession in? Was it Iowa? Where was he a stake president?
Yes. in Iowa.
What was his profession there?
He was in business management, and he worked for an ice cream company.
Okay. Do you remember the name of the company?
Wells Blue Bunny.
Oh, Blue Bunny. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. And so so you're saying that maybe you and your family were having some struggles, and you reached out to Elder Ballard, and then shortly thereafter your dad got a position with the missionary department.
Right. And I don't know if he was already applying there. I have no idea. That is conjecture.
Sure. No, that's fine. That's fine. But you're saying he loved that job.
He does. He works now he's getting ready to retire, but he just got switched to the Perpetual Education Fund. But he worked for the missionary department for years and years.
How long has your dad worked for the church? Any idea?
I believe he started working there in 2000.
Okay. So about 15 years.
Right.
He's been. Okay. And so, but you're saying that Elder Ballard made you feel just a lot better about that things are going to be okay.
He did. I mean, he can be a comforting person to be around.
Yeah. Are you comfortable and just say no if you're not? Are there any other? Are you comfortable sharing any other types of issues you may have gone to your grandpa about that he would have helped you with, or?
I've got one where he wasn't so helpful, and I think probably the listeners are really excited to hear that one. But I'm going to share it because I think it's only fair. But I have been divorced, and I had called him upset, crying, wondering what I could do in my marriage to make it better, what I could possibly do that I hadn't already done. And I ended up, for whatever reason, I didn't have the chance to talk to him at that point in time. So he called me later, and I didn't answer the phone, and he left me a message. And on the message, I know you people are going to love this, he said that I should work on my body, and try to lose some weight and try to make myself attractive. And this made me so angry. I cried forever. I called him an ass. I apologize for my language there, but I was so angry, and rightfully so. But I held it in, and I didn't say anything to him for a really long time because I thought, well, I need to forgive him. I know he didn't come from a place of trying to hurt me. I know that's not how he is. So I held it onto it, and I tried to forgive him. And finally I said, nope, I'm just going to tell him. And because I'm sort of a chicken, I ended up telling him in an email. And I said, hey, your advice was extremely unhelpful, and it was rude, and it's wrong. And I hope you never say anything like that to anyone ever again, because if my husband doesn't want to be with me because I need to drop a few pounds, then I don't want to be with him. And I kind of went off a little bit. And of course I ended it with, I love you. I know you weren't trying to hurt me, but you did. And I hope you learn your lesson. But obviously he hasn't quite learned that lesson. But that was an experience that I struggled with, because it's very difficult for me and other people to not separate the man from the calling, if you will.
Yeah. So. Did he respond to your email?
He did, short and sweet. He said, I didn't mean to hurt you, and I apologize, and I accepted his apology.
That's
it
nice.
Doesn't mean I forgot about it.
Right. Yeah.
But I accepted his apology. We all say things that maybe we don't think twice about, and he does come from a different time. I know it makes people mad when we try to justify it that way. But I do not think he ever means to be insulting. He is occasionally, though. They all are.
Right.
But that's the nature of the beast, I suppose.
So, a lot of people were really lovely in their questions, and they just wanted to hear, and I really appreciate your candor. I think I think it's fair to tell good and, good and bad, right? Like to give a balanced perspective. I think everybody respects that. I know my listeners wouldn't want to hear only negative. That wouldn't seem authentic. It would just seem like a hit job. So I guess I want to say I'm grateful for both, and I want to make sure you feel comfortable just telling it how it is, but also in a balanced way. And so it sounds like you were able to, you lived away from him for a long time. And so you were able to call him every once in a while. And it sounds like he was really busy. Do you have memories of sort of one-on-one time with him that really stick out in your mind of ways you were able to really connect? Or were those opportunities to kind of have one-on-one time with Grandpa in your childhood and early adolescence, were those even available?
I think the time was available. I'm not sure how much we ever connected when we were together alone, because it was always, I don't want to say a lecture, but it was always sort of just him giving me advice. And that's not always what I wanted from him. I think everybody wants a grandparent that they can just, sit down and talk to about things without sort of getting the religion pushed into it. And in all fairness, I think that he takes his calling seriously. And so he feels the need to preach all the time, but I don't always care to hear it all the time. So I don't really know how much we connected on a one-on-one level. We are very different individuals and maybe somewhat similar in the fact that we can both be kind of stubborn. So
So he was kind of always the apostle first and the grandpa second in your direct interactions with him. Is that what you're saying? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yes. No, that is how it felt. Whether or not it felt that way to him, I don't know. But that is how it felt to me personally.
Okay. And so I guess I hear you saying that might have gotten in the way of your intimate relationship with him a bit, because for you, you wanted Grandpa sometimes, not Apostle Ballard.
That's right. And I don't know that I felt I could be my authentic self around him. So that played into it too.
You felt like you had to be what?
More accepting of church culture, maybe. I remember one time we had a little family meeting. I don't even remember what it was about. Probably a church history type thing. And I asked him, this was around the time when the ordained women stuff was becoming a big deal. And I asked him, so what do you think about this ordained women stuff that's going on? And he just blew me off. And I was embarrassed because other people were there and they saw him blow me off. And I was like, okay, guess we can't talk about that. And it bothered me because I am someone who likes to be open and talk about everything. That's how I get through stuff. I talk through things. And unfortunately, I feel like the church is very much silence oriented on a lot of these issues.
And that was kind of maybe your family culture to just not talk about hard things. Is that fair to say? Or?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my family is a whole bunch of crazy. We have so much mental illness running through my family, and we rarely talk about it. And that just makes it worse. That makes all of the problems worse. And so I feel like, truthfully, if I had been able to be more open with who I was, maybe I would have had more desire to stay close to the church. But there's just a big disconnect there where I'm like, I can't be myself. I can't find peace. So that's why I eventually made the decision to resign.
So if it's okay, let's back up a bit. So you're kicked out of 2 high schools. It sounds like you had a turbulent. Now, how much of that, I mean, sometimes we struggle because of just biological factors. Sometimes we struggle because of relational factors in our family. Sometimes cultural factors like the church can be at play. And of course, even we don't know how much each of those factors influence. But if you were to look back on your troubled adolescence, what do you attribute it to? How much of it was the church, culture, guilt, shame, how much of it was just your family dynamics, and maybe all of it was just genetics and your personality. Like, how do you make sense now of your troubled childhood, or have you tried?
I have tried. It is quite the tangled web to unweave. I think definitely part of it is genetics. I take a medicine for anxiety and depression because those were things that I really, really struggled with. But my family didn't really believe in medicine, so I struggled with that for years and years and years. Suicide was constantly on my mind as an option of something that I might want to do.
Starting from what age?
Um, Really, really young. I remember thinking about wanting to be dead when I was just a little kid.
And your family wasn't big on psychology or psychiatry or?
No, none of the above, or medicine, or even just talking about it and getting it out. When I did talk about it, I felt a lot of shame and embarrassment. So I didn't talk about it. I had an experience where I was sexually abused as a child, and when I went to speak to my family about it, they laughed. They laughed at me, and I never spoke about it again. And that was very difficult. And so that was...
Was that in connection with the church?
That was a relative of mine who is a member of the church.
Okay.
And I have forgiven that person, and I have moved on, and I love him, but not being able to talk about it was devastating. And to be laughed at when I was trying to express something, I believe I was 9 at the time, was heartbreaking. And I never felt after that I could be open and honest about anything. And so it was a struggle. So I would say part of it was biological. I know that because after I started taking the proper medication, a lot of it went away. And a lot of it that has continued to haunt me is cultural. The church has done a lot of damage in my life, and I'm watching it do a lot of damage in other people's lives, and it's hard. And it hurts. And I just, if there's anything I want to stand up for, it's for the people hurting in the church.
Maybe you've already talked about it, but if you were to talk about how you feel the church damaged you in your teen years or childhood, what were the main things other than what you've already said?
I think we are told to be perfect, and so many people say, no, we're not told to be perfect. We're told that we can be perfect and we need to try to be better. But in essence, we're told that we need to be perfect. I don't want to get into the semantics of it with people. It's how I feel. And I feel that I'm supposed to be perfect. And it's so unattainable. And it was so unattainable for me then. Right now, for these people who have same-sex attraction and who are gay and lesbian, they feel the same way. They feel like it's to be perfect is to be straight, and that is not going to happen. It's not attainable for me. And so a lot of us struggle with that same idea of Mormon perfection, and it's hard, and it damages people, and it ruined my life in a lot of ways. And I hate to say that. I am a returned missionary. I was a faithful member of the church. And I've always been on guard on saying things that might damage the church. But I have to be honest when I say I truly feel that being a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints took a giant piece of me and ruined it.
And so for you, it was the constant feeling that you needed to be perfect and just constantly feeling like you were failing.
Right. And I think that's everybody. I think everybody has so much anxiety in the church. They can't just sit back and be still. They have to be doing something or be working to be better. Or you can't just sit there and think a thought without thinking, oh, well, I shouldn't have thought that. Or maybe I should be thinking about more productive things. So it's a real problem in the church that I don't think gets addressed nearly enough.
Yeah. Okay, so far I'm hearing you say sort of a culture of not talking about things and a culture of sort of perfection. Any other major sort of dynamics that you feel harmed you in your upbringing with the church? Or are those the main things? I don't want to keep fishing. I just want to make sure.
I really think those are mostly the main things. We're told that we need to be quiet. And good old Grandpa, he is somewhat famous for saying that women should express their feelings, but not talk too much. And I, knowing Grandpa, know that was a stupid joke, but that's how we still feel. I went through a disciplinary council, and that was just awful because it was me in a room with a bunch of men who I wasn't comfortable with, and I felt that I had no say. And so I think a lot of us struggle with feeling like we don't have a say in the church. And it's not just women. I think some men feel that way too.
Okay, so let's so you ended up going from getting kicked out of 2 high schools to serving a mission. Talk about that if you don't mind.
Sure. We moved to Utah. I struggled a lot with depression. It's a cultural shock for anyone. What high school? What high school did you go to? Well, I went to Bingham High School before I got expelled.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
And then after that, I went to, I sort of did a at-home program. I ended up having this brain tumor type thing. It was like a pseudo brain tumor. And so I got these terrible headaches, and I went and had some medical procedures done to alleviate that. But I ended up graduating at home through a program that's done for troubled youth. Okay. So yay me. But I graduated, and I started at the University of Utah. But see, I had always known I wanted to be a missionary since I was a little bitty girl. I was always so offended that the songs about missionaries were geared towards men, because I knew I wanted to go on a mission too, and I knew I'd be awesome at it. And so that was always a goal of mine, and I worked to get myself more spiritually in line. I stopped, before I got my mission call, I stopped watching TV. I stopped listening to anything other than church music. I read my scriptures a lot. I did everything I possibly could to be ready. I will tell you, nothing can prepare you for the temple, though. I mean, that was one of the first times I was like, nope, this is not the church for me.
Why? What was it about the temple that really...
I tell you what, I thought I was as prepared as I could possibly be. And I get in there, and the whole time in my mind, I'm having this conversation with myself, like, are these people for real? Like, do they know how crazy they look? When can I get out of here? Like, every time you could supposed to be able to raise your hand, I wanted to be like, me, get me out of here. Like, I want out. This is scary. Everybody looks insane. You guys are crazy. And I hated it. Hated it so bad. And but I didn't feel I could say that. Of course you can't say that. And some of my family was with me, so then I had this pressure, like, oh, they're watching me, and I've got tears in my eyes, but they're tears of absolute terror instead of, happiness. And then we get into, the celestial room after, and everybody was like, oh, isn't it so wonderful? And I was like, hell no, that was horrible. But you can't really say that either. So I just kind of didn't say anything. And afterwards I told my mom, like, I'm never going back there again. That was super weird. Like, I had heard that it might be a little strange, but that was way more strange than I thought. So
was this the Salt Lake Temple with the live ordinances, or was it the film?
Let's see. The first time I went through, I believe it was the Jordan River Temple. Although I did go through the Salt Lake, and that was weird too.
Yeah. Okay.
But I went, and my mom said her advice to me was just keep going back, and it will be less and less weird. And I'm like, well, sort of. So, and I still struggle with the temple. I have always struggled with that, but I forced myself to get in line with that, and then got called to serve a mission, and went out to serve a mission.
Where'd you go?
I went to the Sydney, Australia South mission, and I loved it.
So you had a great mission.
I did. I'm not saying it was easy. And I'm not saying I was the best missionary. I hated stopping people in the street. In fact, I rarely did, if I ever did. We were supposed to, but I just couldn't do it. I'm like, I hate it when people stop me in the street. So I can't do it. And knocking on doors wasn't as bad because I always got a kick out of seeing people look through the door, see us, and then try to sneak away. I'm like, I get you. I do that too when I'm at home. So it never really bothered me. I didn't love the proselyting part. I was much more service oriented. I enjoyed the service parts more than I did the proselyting.
Did your mission president and did all the missionaries know that you were Elder Ballard's granddaughter?
Yes, and I hated it.
Like, did you try and not tell people? Did you feel like you had to tell people? Did your mission president already know and he told everybody? How did that work?
I did not tell anybody, but he already knew. And I don't know if my grandpa had called him or what happened. And so, it got around, and I heard, and I had an elder tell me once that, oh, well, when your grandpa dies, you're not going to be as special. And I was kind of like, what? I mean, that was rude, first of all, but I mean, that's just how they looked at me, either as competition or as somebody who thought I was better than everybody else. And neither one of those was true. And it was hard. And I had wished that nobody knew.
And so they treated you as either competition or as like better than everybody.
Right. Yes.
And how did that make you, like, you talked about struggling with not living up to expectations and a culture of perfection. Did that get reinforced during your mission at all?
Oh, probably. I think that especially the companions, most of my companions were from small little islands in the South Pacific, and I loved them. But when I got companions from Utah, I always struggled with them because they were more ingrained in sort of that Mormon culture. And I think I was a disappointment to them because I laughed at things that were inappropriate, and I drank Diet Coke and, just these little things that are not that big of a deal that made me a disappointment to other people. And that was hard because I just wanted to be myself.
But you loved serving with the Pacific Islanders.
Of course I did. They were funny. They just told me how life was. I mean, when I was riding on a bike, I had a companion who was like, Sister Roper, when I ride behind you, your butt looks funny. And I'm like, rude. Like, that was just, but I got to the point where I laughed at that because it was not a big deal. And I loved that about them. They just said stuff, and they didn't mean to offend. They just, that's just who they were. And I admired that about them because I didn't have that quality myself.
So I have to make a shout out to fellow podcaster Gina Colvin, who's from New Zealand. Just
oh, nice.
Yeah.
I do love me a good Kiwi person. So
all right. Okay. So overall, your mission was great. Any awful or wonderful experiences on your mission that you feel like you want to talk about, or any ways that your grandpa figured into your mission, or was it just kind of just a great experience?
He probably did figure into my mission, in the fact that I always knew that whatever I would do would be reported back to him somehow. Somehow he would hear about it. And it's not like I wanted to do anything bad, but I always felt like I wasn't doing enough. And so it does play into your everyday life, whether or not anybody ever meant it to. It does. But I loved it. I loved the people in Australia. I loved their culture. I loved the fact that they were honest. When you asked them, why weren't you at church on Sunday? They would say, I couldn't be bothered. And I'm like, I kind of like that. That's refreshing. Like,
yeah.
But you try to do that in the US and people just think you're horrible. But I loved that they were very honest about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Given your upbringing, it sounds like that would have been really refreshing.
Oh, definitely. Anytime anybody tells me truthfully how they feel about something, I love it. And I don't always like to hear it. Maybe it's negative, but I appreciate it. I do.
Yeah. So there's never a point in your mission where your grandpa had to get involved or you had to call him, anything like that? Are you still there?
Yeah, sorry, I missed that last part. Was there a
Oh,
point in my mission?
where your grandpa had to get involved or you had to call him or anything like that?
Um, no, not necessarily. There was a point in my mission where I got really, really depressed. I think just everything just stressed me out. And so I think he tried to get me to talk to, I can't remember his first name, but one of the area authorities, and I was not comfortable doing that. So I think he tried to help me in any way he could, but I just wanted to take care of myself.
So, so you made it through.
I did.
You were able to work through that.
Shockingly, that was pre-medication days. I don't know how I did it, but I did, and I loved it. And I'll be honest with you, I'm very careful even now to what I say to the people who I taught who joined the church, because I would hate to be the reason they leave the church if the church makes them happy. I think they should stay.
Yeah. You probably feel that about everybody, right?
I do.
Yeah.
I have always related to Alma the Younger and even Korihor. I've been called Korihor a few times, and I'm like, whoa, way to give me a Book of Mormon insult. But I've been told I'll regret leading people away, so I'm very careful. I try very hard to not say anything that would influence anybody one way or another.
Right. Okay, so you served the full 18 months?
I did, yes.
Okay, tell us what happened after that.
Um, After that, I came home and I actually met my future husband in Australia. Right before I left, he became my district leader, and we did not like each other at all. I think it was because he thought I was supposed to be this type of person, and I was not. And so he had higher expectations for me than he had for the other sister missionaries, and that made me mad. So we didn't really get along very well. But right before I left, I felt bad for it. I had a change of heart. I decided, you know what, you got to give this kid a break. And so I wrote to him after I was home, and we became better friends. And then when he came home, we hung out a few times and eventually started dating, and we got married in the temple.
Where was he from?
He was from Southern California, Barstow.
Okay. And so did your grandpa perform the wedding ceremony?
He did. That he did.
Okay. And so you got married, and then kind of take us from then to now.
Well, then we were married about only a year, and I got pregnant with my son quickly, and we got divorced. I struggled with postpartum depression, and he didn't know how to deal with that. I didn't know how to deal with that, and we fought a lot, and we just decided we were going to separate, and that eventually led to us divorcing, but we would get together every now and then, and that's how I got pregnant with my daughter. Woo! So
After you'd been divorced.
After we were separated,
Okay.
we weren't divorced yet. And so I think my divorce was final the day after my daughter was born. So then I lived life as a single mom for a while on welfare.
Real quick, what year were you married and what year were you divorced?
I was married in 2006, and our divorce was final in December of 2008. So
it's
we were
2 years.
separated.
So you were only married 2 years.
Yes.
And you were separated for how much of that 2 years?
Almost, well, a lot of it, off and on. The majority of it, probably, we were separated.
So it was just a tough marriage.
It was, for sure, which makes the next part so confusing, the fact that we got remarried, like the good little Mormon family we are.
Okay, real quick. What was it like being the granddaughter of a Ballard to even get divorced? Was that, was it awful? Was your family embarrassed? Were they supportive? Were they loving? Did you feel shame? What was that like?
I did feel shame, and I'm sure my family was embarrassed, but they were also pretty supportive of me. They helped me go through that entire process and get a lawyer, helped pay for it. I mean, it was just an awful situation to go through. So they were supportive, but I did feel shame, and I'm sure that they were embarrassed.
Yeah. But you felt loved and supported.
Yeah, I think so.
And by your grandparents too?
Yes, I did feel supported by my grandparents.
Good, good. And okay, so you got divorced, but then remarried.
Yes, we were divorced about a year, and then, much to my in-laws' chagrin, we remarried and moved to Southern California. So it was a question that I think everybody had. Why did you get married? And I think we have love for each other, although we are not perfect.
Sure. Okay, so take it that marriage didn't last either, that second marriage?
Oh, we are still together, and that is so shocking. And honestly, sometimes I wonder, will we make it through this? I know that he is a little more against the idea of leaving the church than I am, so I find it a little ironic that the church is all about saving families, but so many people divorce after one of the people in the marriage equation leaves the church. So I do wonder what will happen. I don't know.
Okay, so you have two children together?
Yes, that's right.
And you've been married how many years now?
Almost 10 years.
Almost 10 years. Okay. And you guys live where? What state?
We live in Texas right
Okay.
now.
And okay, so you're still married.
Yes.
All right, congratulations.
Thank you. Every day, right, is a victory in marriage. You got to love people, but it's work.
And so he right now wants to stay in the church, you're saying?
Yes, he is inactive. He doesn't go to church, but he's not. He has no desire to leave the church.
Okay, but he's not attending.
No.
So he still believes.
Yes, he does.
Okay. Okay. All right. So what is there anything else about your story that you think we should talk about before we talk about what caused you to stop believing?
I think a segue into that is an experience I had somewhat recently, and not proud of this, but I committed adultery. And so I was.
Whoa, wait a minute. That's something that people don't normally admit to. So, I mean,
well,
that's
okay,
amazing.
So that's another problem. Like, people are very uncomfortable with me saying that. My marriage was not perfect. My husband was abusive in a few ways that he has been working on. And when he was at his worst, I was at my most depressed. And I was approached by someone. And the story is actually, I've written about it in my blog. But it's funny because it ties into the church, where I met a couple at the pool, and at our neighborhood pool, and their son was good friends with my son. And I started talking to them about the church. And I talked to them for about 2 hours, and I got really excited about it. And I just felt so strongly that I should send the missionaries over there. So and they said, yeah, we're interested. We want to know more. So I sent the missionaries over there. And then the next Sunday at church, the missionary said to me, yeah, the guy was like, why would I let you in my house? Get out of here. And I remember being so upset. But I also remember thinking, well, I need to be friends with him. Maybe that's, I need to build up a friendship, and maybe that's how he'll learn about the gospel. Well, when you're unhappy in your marriage, and there's another person in there who's all of a sudden very kind and nice to you, and you've had no relationships other than the one with your husband, It's very easy to get caught up in something. And I did not, I suppose I'm very naive, and I didn't know how people outside of the church talked to each other and what was appropriate and what was not appropriate and what was flirting and what wasn't flirting. And so eventually it became into an affair, and it didn't start out that way, but that is what happened. And it was not something that I necessarily enjoyed, and I feel like it was more of a self-destructive behavior of mine than it was helpful at all. But it happened, and I do admit to that, because I believe I've moved past it, and I don't want to be labeled with the scarlet A. But so anyway, so I went and told my bishop right after, like, I had sex with this person right after I went and told my bishop.
What year was this a bit about?
This was last year.
Okay.
And I told him, and I said, take my temple recommend, I'm not worthy. And he's like, well, wait, what's going on? Talk to me about it. And I said, I had sex with someone, and he was kind of like, yeah, sure, give me that temple recommend. And so then he said, well, we're going to have a disciplinary council. And I was very terrified, because we are not privy to information in the handbook. So I had no idea what that entailed, and it was very scary to me. And that's an issue I have about the handbook. I think it should be available to everybody. So I just said, nah, I don't want to do that. Excommunicate me. And he said, I don't feel comfortable with that. I'm not going to. And so I decided I would just try to be tough and get through it. And I went through the disciplinary council process, and I went through the repentance process, but that is sort of where my doubts or struggles really started to take root.
How was the process, the disciplinary council process, for you?
I did everything I was supposed to do. So it was about 6 months before I was considered repentant enough, or my sins were washed away, or whatever they say.
And what were some of the things that you were asked to do, and that you were disfellowshipped, I'm assuming?
Yes.
Okay.
And I was asked to obviously not participate, but to go to church, which is always awkward when somebody asks you to say the prayer, and you're just kind of like, what am I supposed to say here?
What did you say?
I said, I can't. Bishop won't let me. And just because I wanted it, it was already uncomfortable, and I was just like, sorry if it's uncomfortable for everybody else. Like, I apologize. But so I was asked to read the so helpful book, Miracle of Forgiveness, which is just wonderful. And I think everybody should definitely read that if they want to feel bad about themselves. So I was asked to read that, and I was asked to read several scriptures, and I did all of that, and to not take the sacrament. Of course, I had already stopped taking the sacrament. And
did that feel like the process reinforced the shame cycle you had been in for so many years, like having to say no to prayers, having it be visible that you couldn't take the sacrament? Like, did you feel like that process reinforced the shame cycle for you, or not necessarily?
I guess I thought that it was due punishment, and so I don't think that part made me feel ashamed. I think the sitting in a room with a bunch of men talking about sexual activity was horrible for me. That was very painful, and it opened up a lot of painful wounds that I did not want to reopen. And that, I believe, was very shaming to me. I felt naked in that room of men, and very picked apart and judged, and it was disgusting to me. And
did they ask details? Was it that kind of thing?
I went in and I said, I'm not sharing any details with you. Don't ask. If you want to assume the worst, then assume the worst, because I was already in enough pain about the situation where I didn't feel like it was any of their business, to be honest with you. And I knew that it would be more painful for me to to express those details. And I said, God already knows. If you want to know, if you want to go and figure out the worst thing I've done, well, you just imagine it, and fine. And that may or may not be true. It depends how bad their imagination is. But I just said, I'm not comfortable sharing the details, and I don't think that's something you guys need to know.
Okay. But it was still not a great process for you.
No, and I don't blame them. They were doing everything they were taught to do, the men in the disciplinary council. I have a lot of respect for them, and I don't think it was easy for them either. But it was still an awful experience that I would have no desire to ever do again.
Sure. And just before we talk about what happened after, was there a point where you had to tell your grandma and grandpa what happened? And if so, what was that like?
No, I didn't really ever have to tell anyone, but I am the type of person who wants to be open, and I struggle when I keep things inside. Like I want to be able to tell people my truth, and maybe they'll learn from my mistakes. I mean, I don't learn from anybody else's mistakes, but maybe somebody is smarter than me and will learn from my mistakes. So I did tell my grandfather that I was when I was on probation. Told him I was on probation, and it was a possibility I could be excommunicated. And he said, "Well, I don't think you've done anything that you could be excommunicated for." And I'm like, "You want to bet?" Like, and I was way too uncomfortable to be like, "Well, I committed adultery, so what do you think about that? That's the sin next to murder. It's horrible." And so I never told him that. So if he listens to this, he might be horribly surprised. But he knew that I was going through something. So
what counsel did he give you?
Well, when I had told him that I wanted to leave the church originally, he told me, go inactive before you leave the church. Don't make those decisions that you can't undo. It's a serious thing. And I think he was trying to get me to realize how serious resigning and getting rid of all of those blessings would be. So his advice was to go inactive, which I thought was funny at the time, but it makes sense to me why he would suggest that.
What about his encouragement around your disciplinary counsel, though, and the sins you had committed and that sort of thing?
I didn't really talk to him much about that.
Okay. Or the disciplinary counsel process?
No, I didn't. Although I have since told him that if my feelings on the handbook and if it had been allowed to be shown to me before any of this had happened, I would have been perhaps more willing to go in. But the not knowing of the process was terrifying to me, and it made me just want to say, forget it, excommunicate me.
Okay, but you felt, when you told him that you were struggling, you felt the normal love that you, I'm assuming you felt love and support from him.
I did. I feel like he has been frustrated with me in the past. I must be that kind of person who just has a thick skull and can't get stuff in there easily, because I just can't accept things as easily as other people can, and to my knowledge, the majority of my family can.
But
so
do you see that? Do you see that now as a vice or a virtue? Like, I could think back to people on my mission, troublemaking elders, and we used to all think of them as the slackers and as the lazy people. And now I look back and I think some of those guys just figured out that the church wasn't what it claimed to be a lot earlier than the rest of us, and they weren't able to be the missionaries we were because they didn't buy it. And so do you see your thick-skulledness as a virtue now or as a vice? I'm just curious.
I still am not to the point where I see it as a virtue, because I still have so much of that inside me that's saying, you could be wrong. You could be wrong questioning this. And I give myself room to say I could be wrong. That doesn't change my feelings, but I still struggle with seeing it as a good thing versus as a bad thing.
That's fair. I mean, it's hard to leave this church. It's hard.
Right.
Okay, so you went through the 6 months, and then what happened?
And then I basically begged the bishop to consider me repented. I felt like I had gone through the whole process. I felt like I had worked out my crap. I had started therapy, working through why I had ever felt the need to cheat on my husband. And we worked through some of that deep, dark, terrible stuff in my past. And I felt a lot better. And I felt like I could answer the temple recommend questions honestly. And so I did.
Talk a bit about what insight you gained. Why do you think you felt the desire, if you're comfortable, just to help others who may be contemplating infidelity or have been through it themselves? What insight did you gain into why you felt like you did that, and what have you learned from it?
Well, I think all adultery comes from some sort of pain. And the man that I had an affair with is kind of a terrible person, but he is going through his own pain. Not that I care about that anymore, but I think it's all rooted in pain, and there's so much more understanding there. I've always been a pretty sympathetic and empathetic person towards people and their struggles, but now I can honestly say that I cannot look down on anyone because I have been there and I have made these terrible mistakes that I was pretty judgmental about before. So if nothing else, I'm a kinder person than I was before.
So you're kinder, but you think you were vulnerable to that because why?
Well, because I had first of all, I have terrible self-esteem. I think it's getting better. At the further I get from the church, the better my self-esteem gets, which is a hard thing to wrap my head around. My self-esteem was bad. It was terrible because I felt so worthless except for the fact that I could produce babies or, I don't know, my self-esteem was squashed. I think it was wonderful when I was a really little kid. I remember feeling so free to be who I was. And then somewhere along the way, I feel like it was lost somewhere in the depths of church culture.
Okay. So for you, you feel like you lost who you were, weren't able to cultivate that, and had a lot of insecurities, and that left you maybe vulnerable.
Exactly. I mean, and that's not the case for everyone. For me, it wasn't about sex. It was about trying to connect with someone. And I did it in the wrong way. Absolutely. But we're all reaching out. We're all trying to find connection.
So you were just trying to emotionally find intimacy with somebody because maybe in your marriage, you guys didn't quite have that.
Absolutely. The man that I cheated with was not trying to find that, but I was.
You were looking for intimacy. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So you go through the disciplinary council process, you beg to get back in, and what happens?
He believes me that I am back on track. And quite frankly, I would have been angry if he hadn't, because I really felt good, like I was at a good place with God and everything. And so he gave me my temple recommend back, and I was able to attend one of my cousin's weddings, and that was awesome. But that was the only time I went back to the temple because, me and the temple have a weird relationship. But just having a temple recommend meant something to me.
So when would that wedding have been?
That was just this past summer.
Okay. So just a few months ago.
May. Yep, in May.
Okay, May. So tell us about what led to you resigning.
I've always, and I'm not proud of this, but I've always felt like I have been in limbo, have been doing some sort of dance with the church where I'm 1 foot in, 1 foot out, 1 foot in. And when I first saw the thing about the handbook changes, I thought, well, that's
okay.
not...
Wait. Sorry. I'm happy with you taking us through the chronology from getting back to the temple. People are asking, were there cracks in your testimony? Like, were there any current events going on that may have influenced it? Did you study church history? So talk to us about the first cracks in your testimony, and that it could be from childhood, but then talk us through the process of losing your testimony, and take as much time and as much detail as you want to provide, because a lot of people are just, they go through it, they want to know what you went through.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm always worried about being boring and
No,
sharing
this is
it
all
more
this is all
people.
really good. I'm loving this
Okay.
interview.
So the first cracks in my testimony absolutely would have started when I was a child, when I saw how people treated one another in the church. For me, that was always a problem. And
Meaning what?
well, whenever I suggested that I didn't like what was taught, even as a young child, or I questioned it, people would just label that as bad attitude. Oh, that's just Laura being Laura. And they brushed off my feelings like they were not valid, starting from way back as a child. And I saw judgment there in church. People are not perfect. Nowhere are people perfect. And it's kind of rough that we hold Mormons to a higher standard, but I couldn't see why there was so much backbiting and mean talk between people who I thought were probably doing their best in the callings they were given. So that was hard for me. I'm a sensitive person. I feel bad for people when I see their suffering. Then as a teenager, learning more about polygamy, I was just disgusted by the whole process of polygamy. And I come from polygamist stock. So that was difficult to kind of figure that part out. And that was something on my mission I hated teaching about. And I definitely tried to brush over it and not talk about it very much. But I didn't know very much about it. I didn't allow myself to sit down and learn very much about polygamy because I was afraid of what I might read. So I ignored that. But that was a crack in the testimony for sure. Seeing the differences of how the young men and young women were treated, how much money went into scouting programs and all of that versus the young women programs. That bothered me also. But I'm very good at justifying why this stuff could happen. I'm very good at apologizing for the church and taking the church's position on things. So all of these things led up. Then just life experiences, watching myself fail at being a good member of the church. That was hard for me, but it created more cracks in my testimony, if you will. Now, I will straight up say to you in full disclosure that I don't know where I am in my testimony. I still believe that it could be true. And I always like to say I leave my mind open for possibilities. So, but, I just like to never say anything for sure. Like I can't say for sure that God is or is not there, or that Joseph Smith was or was not a liar. I don't really know that. But I question it. So it's just been little things, seeing the church do things. I actually worked at the church office building, and I know people are like, oh, did your grandpa get you that job? To which I always reply, if he got me that job, I wouldn't have been scrubbing dishes down in the church office building kitchen. Like, I would have demanded a better job. But so I worked there for a while, and that was hard for my testimony. And I had somebody accuse me once of shortchanging them when they went through to buy their lunch, and I knew for a fact that I hadn't. And of course, I was blamed because I was the lowly cafeteria worker, and I had to pay that out of my paycheck, and it was like $10, but that was more than I earned in like an hour and a half. And it bothered me, and I saw, okay. And just a bunch of different things. run-ins I had with apostles or stories that I was privy to hear, which I will probably never be privy to hear after this, just about different things that they've said in their personal life, not regarding to the church, that bothered me. But I always said, oh, well, they're a man. That's their man talking, their natural man talking, not their apostle side.
So without naming names, are you able to talk about the types of things, or would you rather not?
Yes, I was neighbors with President Monson's son, one of his sons. And so, man, I hope that this doesn't hurt them. But I heard a story, this is just a little story, and it definitely shouldn't change anybody's testimony, but about how he treated somebody on the wait staff of one of their meals. They have a lot of meals. And
President Monson or the son?
President Monson.
Okay.
Just rude comment about what had been served. I believe it actually wasn't the wait staff, but the cook. And how he was upset that it wasn't a certain food, and it just turned me off. And I thought, well, is there a sense of entitlement here? Do these men have a sense of entitlement? And they are treated kind of like royalty, and that bothers me too. But there's so many things that have caused me to question and to wonder, is this something I want to be a part of?
And you said you've had run-ins with apostles that were tough for you?
Yeah, and it's silly. It's silly, stupid stuff that probably should not affect anybody's testimony. But the President Packer, he was kind of a grumpy old man. And, I mean, he probably didn't feel good. And he was old, and so I get that. But it was when I ran into him once, and I had said something to him, and he kind of just brushed me off. And I just got sick of being brushed off by everyone. And maybe I'm not worth anything to him, but I felt like maybe I should have been, or we should be, us little peons in the church. You know, we've got this church up on our shoulders. We're carrying it. We're doing this tons and tons of labor. I feel like we should be treated a little bit nicer than we are. So just small little things.
So one of the stereotypes that makes ex-Mormons really uncomfortable is when people dismiss their leaving the church as being caused by their having been offended. And the stories that you just told, play into that narrative that, we don't have to listen to her anymore because she just got offended and she couldn't take it. That's why she left. How would you respond if somebody tried to dismiss you by saying, you don't count because you were just offended?
Well, it's kind of laughable to me. But I've done that to people. I've discounted them because they left because they were offended. And it's wrong. It's just something that happens so often in Mormon culture. I would say, I'm a really forgiving person, and I don't think I could ever make such an important life choice on just being offended. But if somebody does, I think that's totally valid. And who are we to say that your feelings don't matter? People's feelings matter, and we need to remember that, and we need to honor their feelings. And so I would never be caught brushing off somebody's feelings as just being offended, because it's important. We need to learn from that. If we've done something to hurt somebody, we need to figure out how we can help. I thought that was the whole point of the gospel of Jesus Christ, but it doesn't always feel that way. So that would be my somewhat lengthy response.
So if President Monson or President Packer are rude to the help or brushing off people who are really trying, that would be a concern to you. Why?
Because it's not fair. Trust me, if I wanted to leave the church because I was offended by President Packer being grouchy, I would have left a long time ago. Like that is just nothing I would leave the church over, really. But it bothers me because everybody is important in the church. Everybody should be treated like they are important, like they are sons and daughters of God. If that is what we profess to believe, then that is what we need to do. we need to act like it, and so many of us don't. And it's important, and it's sad, and I wish it would change.
Okay. So, has your study of church history, or, websites or podcasts or blogs or books, have any of those things also been a part of your disaffection from the church? And if so, which ones and what issues? So have you heard of CES Letter? Have you read that?
Yes.
Have you read that?
I had tried to read it several times, and I was like, whoa, this thing's 84 pages long. Like, and several times I would stop reading it because I'm like, that's not important. I still believe it's true. Like, there are so many ways to justify what is in there by saying we don't understand God's plan. But it also, it was good to read it because I think knowledge is power. And I think learning some of these things are good for people. Wow, like Martin Harris, what a weirdo, right? And so you don't know these things growing up in the church. We don't talk about them. But I think it's just so much better if we do read and we do our homework. How can anybody say a church is true if they haven't done their research? And so I have been working on that. I have not read everything out there. I tend to not enjoy argumentative type conversations. And so if I am somewhere where people start fighting, I leave it. I commented sometime on CTR.com. Some woman had written an article about why she would not murmur with those who are murmuring. And I wrote mourn or murmur because I see a difference there. And that's all I wrote. And she went back on this big, long, lengthy thing to fight with me. And then a couple other people sort of piled in, and I'm like, well, we'll just have to agree to disagree. And I left it because I'm not comfortable fighting or bringing up bad feelings. But I think it's a good thing that I'm starting to look more. Mormon Stories has really been helpful to me. Just knowing that other people are out there who feel what I felt, and hearing some of the things people say, I'm like, oh, that's me. I mean, it's silly. We should all know that other people are out there going through similar things, but we don't always, because we're so caught up in the fear of leaving the church and the fear of what's going to happen. But so many people have reached out to me that I don't even know when I started saying, hey, I'm thinking about maybe doing this. What do you think? And I was shocked, really, and pleasantly surprised, because when you're in the church, you think that people who leave are kind of these like scary, mean, antagonistic type people. And then when you get to know them, you're like, oh, no, you're totally not like that. So Mormon Stories. I'll give you a plug. John. It's been helpful.
Well, I don't care so much for a plug, but I do like to learn what stories or issues touch people or are meaningful to people, because that's, I'm just always interested in what people's experiences are and what's meaningful. So
Mm-hmm.
were there any podcast episodes that were particularly touching to you? I'm just curious what reached you.
I feel like I enjoy listening to all of them. I think some people, the majority of people that you've had on, are much more intelligent than I am. But I love to hear just every story. I like to hear how color enters people's lives when they've been in a black and white sort of environment. And so I really think that from somebody as supposedly there's something like a ex-Mormon royalty, which I was like, what's that? Like, you guys have your own special royalty? You guys are famous? I guess I'm new to all of it. But so you've got the people who are high up, and I'm interested in their opinions, but I'm also interested in, your average Joe who's left, and they have real struggles too. Just because they don't have maybe an in with the church, their stories are still interesting and fascinating to me.
Okay. Did you ever get a chance to learn about the polygamy in depth, like polyandry? Do you know about that? About Joseph Smith marrying women who were married to other men, and the age of the women. Like, have you gotten into the details of polygamy at all?
Yes, I did read into that. And it did bother me. I mean, from the time I was young, I never was a fan of this idea of polygamy. And I was always like, well, I don't want to be in a church that does that. Um, but I was always able to justify it. And I guess it's so hard knowing that Joseph Smith is a relative of mine for me to be like, oh, what a pervert, you know? So I see that. I don't like it. I don't like that he married other people's wives. Um, but I'm not at the point yet where I can completely write him off. I'm just not there. Check in with me. I might get there eventually, but I'm not there yet.
What do you know if Hyrum was polygamous?
No, he was not. He was married to a woman named Jerusha, and I believe they had about 6 kids, and then she died. And then Hyrum remarried Mary Fielding, and I come from her line. And then, as far as I know, he was never sealed to anyone else. That's as far as I know. I figure I probably would have heard about it if he was, but.
So as far as you know, Hyrum was not polygamous.
That's right, as far as I know.
Okay. Have you studied, and I'm just curious, have you studied issues around the Book of Mormon, its translation, the historicity, issues around the Book of Abraham? Like, have you even gotten into that stuff yet?
Yes, I have. I've read into that, and there's always a part of my mind saying, yeah, this is super dodgy. But then the other part is saying, well, you don't understand everything. You don't understand God's plan. You don't understand this or that. And who are you to say that you understand this? Like the whole wisdom of man versus wisdom of God. So I struggle with that. It's hard for me to make a decision either way. I know that I don't like a lot of it, and a lot of it seems questionable to me. But I also know that I don't understand pretty much anything. I'm pretty dumb when it comes to what I understand and what I do not understand in the big scheme of things.
And I don't want to sort of correct you here. I just want to say that I think, just my perspective, I've studied psychology a little bit. I don't like to think of it as dumb or not dumb. Some people are more feeling and intuitive. Some people are more logical and rational. And I just want to say that both perspectives are valid. Some people just, things don't feel quite right, and they don't want or need to dig into the details to just know it doesn't feel right to them. And I think that's as legitimate as somebody who's super scholarly, who went to Yale and studies things in depth. I guess I would want to give you that.
Well, thank you. I mean, and that is kind of true. I do generally go on feelings more than I do what is seen in front of me, because I understand that the logic may or may not fit in with my paradigm of thinking. But I may get to the point where more of that bothers me from a logistical standpoint. Like I said, I'm not there yet. I'm relatively new on this whole journey it's been a long time coming, but of allowing myself to read some of this stuff that has always been preached against in my family.
Right. Okay, so your story is a little bit different than I'm used to, because most of the 2/3 of the LDS Church is inactive, right? And and resignation is a really sort of severe, kind of extreme step that more people are taking these days, but it's still relatively rare. I mean, I couldn't even resign. I sort of had to force them to excommunicate me, because I don't think I would have been willing to take that step personally. And so you've taken it, but you've taken it still not sure whether you believe in Joseph as a prophet or not, in the Book of Mormon as scripture or not. So talk to us about why you would take that extreme step, and yet you're still ambivalent about whether you believe or not. Why? What led to you resigning?
I think that I am on a quest for peace and happiness, and I think so many other people are on that same quest. And I do not feel peace and happiness within the church. And that is my own personal struggle. And so everybody's reasoning may be different. I'm not sure how I feel about the truthfulness or not, but I do know one thing, and it's something that I've slowly learned. I was raised to believe in a very terrifying and scary God. And it has taken me years and years and years to come to my own personal belief that that is not my God. That is not the God that I want to believe in or do believe in. And so I believe, even though I am choosing to leave, I mean, they may not let me leave without a fight. And I'm kind of thinking I will have to fight to leave. I think that there may be plays to get me to not leave. But I believe that if the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is true, and I leave anyway, I think there's room in there for me still. If we all die and we find out, hey, we left the church, but it was right anyway, I still believe that God is going to say, you can still join us. I still truly believe that. And if it's not true, then I'm going to be okay too. I just want to enjoy my life. I want to enjoy it without constantly worrying about where I am. And I want to be outside and just enjoy being outside and not worry about my next steps to eternal progression. There's so much stress and so much pressure. And I feel like my kids are going to have a better life outside of the church than inside the church. Now, granted, my daughter is 7. She does want to be baptized when she turns 8, and I will let her make that decision. Although I wish that I had chosen not to when I was 8. But, you know, it's a rough patch, and I really hope people don't think of me as hypocritical. I feel that I'm just trying to be honest and saying I don't know everything. I don't know how I feel about everything, but I know that being outside of the church, I'm happier than when I'm inside of the church.
And so for you, you're resigning because the church brings you sadness and not joy.
Right. And people always like to say it's true or it isn't. It's very simple. I don't believe anything is simple. I think there are a million different shades of gray. Unfortunately, I was always raised with the black and white thinking. And I've come to learn through my own life experiences that nothing is black and white. Everything has a million different shades in between. And I just want people to find happiness wherever. If it's in the church, then find it in the church. If it's outside of the church, then find it outside of the church.
Are there teachings in the church that you don't believe in? Like any of the doctrines or teachings, historical or current, that you actually object to?
Now, are we talking doctrines, or are we talking policy, or, I mean, we getting into the semantics, or are we just...
No. I mean, so there's, it sounds like you still believe in God. It sounds like you still believe in Jesus. It sounds like you're on the fence about the restoration. Maybe God was behind it. Maybe he wasn't. It sounds like you're on the fence about the Book of Mormon and Book of Abraham as scripture. But you still have tender feelings about them. So, and then I'm thinking through the Temple Recommend questions, like, I'm wondering, so like sustaining Thomas S. Monson as prophet, like a lot of people even wonder if he has his full faculties, if he has dementia. Like, where are you on that?
If somebody were to hold a gun to my head and say, tell me one way or the other, there's no in between, I would err on the side of caution and say, yeah, I feel like he is a prophet. Now, saying that is hard because there's always that room for doubt, and I have doubt as to whether or not they are prophets. I do think that they believe they are. And so I don't think that they're trying to do it for any I'm always asking myself, what's the end game? Okay, say the whole thing is fake. Say everybody's lying. What's the end game? Is it money? Is it power? What is it? And I just can't ever seem to align any sort of mischievous end game with what they're doing. So I would still say, yes, I believe that he is a prophet, but he could prove me wrong tomorrow. I mean, ask me in a few months, maybe after I've gone through the whole process, I'll change my mind. I'm sorry, that's not a great answer.
No, that's a great answer. I don't want any answer other than what you really think and feel, and that's great. What about the church's policies on LGBT people and on women and the priesthood, those types of things?
Mm-hmm. I don't like any policy that hurts someone. And that is where I do struggle when I see people hurting. I wonder, how can that be right? How can that be true if so many people are hurting? Because I've been there. I've been hurting in the church, and it's not necessarily because I was gay or because I wanted the priesthood, but it was because I was hurting for other things in the church. And so I don't agree with those. I don't necessarily feel the need to get behind the women in the priesthood thing, because I feel like if I'm not in the church, it doesn't really matter. But I feel like if I were in the church, I could get behind that. I could get behind anything that's for equality. I disagree with taking away anybody's choice to be baptized. So I disagree with that policy. And I've told my grandpa just as much, that I disagree. And I think that was surprising a little bit to him. And he did send all of us as a family an email saying, before you jump to conclusions, it's wise to do all your research. And he said, watch the thing with Elder Christofferson and read some scriptures. And I did. I did all of that before I jumped to any conclusion. And afterwards I emailed him back and I said, I still can't get behind that. I don't agree with it. I'm sorry, still love you, but I don't love that, and I don't agree with it. And I can't feel peace with that. So
did he respond?
No. I have not heard from him since, actually. So I did tell him I had sent in my resignation, and I have not heard back from him. So
who'd you send it to?
I sent it to the church records department. I also told my bishop. So we'll see. I mean, I sent my bishop the same type of thing because I pretty much realized it would just get sent to him anyway. And he sent me an email saying, hey, remember when you got your temple recommend back and you were so good and you were in such a good place in your life? Remember that? And I was like, yeah, but I feel like I'm in a better place now. So I think it will be a battle for me to leave. I'm not sure they're going to take that resignation well.
And it sounds like you yourself aren't totally sure. It sounds like you're ambivalent about it.
You know, it's so hard to leave. I feel good about it. I feel good about my decision to leave. But it would be easier to leave if I thought everything was fake and everything was a lie. But I can't say I truly believe that. And so that makes it harder to leave in a lot of ways. But I do feel good about leaving, and that is why I made that decision.
And you're going to go with how you feel in the end?
Always. Always.
Okay. All right. Thanks for joining us today on Mormon Stories. If you enjoyed this episode, please help us make more like it by becoming a monthly subscriber at mormonstories.org. Music for this episode was provided by The Lower Lights.
When other sources cease to make me whole, when with the